Good morning again. Happy Sabbath. Just gonna move some stuff around here. I want to actually begin by I don't know if I have a name for this game, but it is, I don't know if we'll call it, is it accurate, or maybe do we use it right? But it's not going to be on the screen. The first thing, so what's going to happen is I'm going to name a phrase that is potentially associated with the Bible, that is, or we use in Christian culture and Christian context very often. But I actually want to see if we believe that it is being used correctly. And the first one is going to be a phrase that you might hear sometimes. People might share it in a Facebook post, or they might just tell you this when you're going through a difficult time. And it is this quote: God gives his strongest battles to his strongest soldiers. Who here believes that that is like biblically accurate, that that is based on a text? Okay. Does anyone else have some questions here? Do we have some questions on that particular, on the theological messaging of that section? Okay. The next one is this: where two or three are gathered, there is the presence of the Lord. How many of you think we use it in its proper context? Oh, I saw some hands go up and down. Okay. All right, cool. And then the last one is this: spare the rod, spoil the child. Is that one biblically accurate and used? It sets over here. Okay, we got a mixed bag here. Okay, so I want to share what they are referring to. We'll talk about God gives his strongest battles to his strongest soldiers. And I would surmise to say that while that is relatively comforting, biblically speaking, the Bible teaches us that we are weak on our own, and God uses human weakness to show his power. And that there's other texts in the Bible that talk about God being willing to fight for you. So while there is elements of strength that we can have, that strength comes from the Lord. The next one is where two or three are gathered. This one I know is going to ruffle some feathers in the Christian community. But we have been using it wrong based on the context of the text. It has nothing to do, not nothing to do, it has very little to do with two or three people praying in a group. What it has more to do is it's found in Matthew chapter 18. And Matthew chapter 18 is connected to conflict resolution. So when it's talking about two or three being together, it is talking about a step-by-step process to resolve personal conflict. And community restoration and confrontation, that when two or three people gather together to resolve a conflict, the presence of the Lord is there. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you're in your room praying on your own, that the presence of God isn't there, or that God is any more present in a corporate setting than he would be meeting you individually. I know that one's probably not as popular. The last one is the one I mentioned: spare the rod, spoil the child. And while that is not an actual biblical verse, the text does say this in Proverbs 13, verse 24. Whoever spares the rod hates their child, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. And there's a lot to be examined here in terms of how we understand this. I don't know that it is purely based on spanking. I don't know that it's purely based on, because the rod in the Bible is kind of referred to in different ways, right? In Psalm 23, it says, your rod and your staff comfort me. So when it's talking about a rod, is it a literal rod, or is it something that is used figuratively? But it is interesting, though, that the part we leave out of this text, if we want to use this text, is it says, the one who loves their children is careful in how they discipline them. That it doesn't mean you grab the rod and start, hacking away. That there is a little bit of a method that comes from Christ. And we are in a series, and I say all that to say we are in a series called Family Matters, not the show, as I talked about last week. And there are 4 different things here, and we are in arguably maybe the one that if you are a parent, you have been waiting for someone to talk about. The funny thing is, I'm the person that's not a parent yet. I have a baby on the way, so I don't know what to tell you on that front. But each of them have been built on different ways. It says, foundation, you are safe with me. Connect, you are loved no matter what. Coach, you are called and capable. And the 4th one, you are responsible for your actions based on the theme, correct. And it's interesting, though, in many ways, this is probably the one that could be really popular. And the question that comes up is, what do we do when someone in our community or in our family inevitably misbehaves or makes mistakes? It does feel like there is this conversation going on in the world right now, is people just don't know how to tell their kids right from wrong. People just aren't being coached in how to do that or corrected enough. right? And there is a lot of discourse about the correct way to do that. A lot of people lean on the way that they were parented, or they think that, you want to go gentle parenting or traditional parenting, right? All these various conversations. It's interesting, though, that for me, this is a little bit of a research project, right, for me as I'm preparing to be a parent. But one of the things I landed at as we begin is all of us have a different line and approach to when it comes to correcting somebody. Like all of us are thinking of something different. All of us have different things that come to mind. All of us have a different history when it comes to that. And the reality is, as human beings, we miss the mark very often. As children, we call it misbehavior. As adults, I don't know what we call it, mistakes or failures, whatever that word is. And oftentimes, our desires for good are often split between this two-part thing where it feels like we want to do the right thing, but there are times that the thing we don't want to do feels just as right as the thing that we're supposed to do. Right? And our desires are often split. And actually, this isn't just a challenge with children or with youth or with college students. It is a challenge that exists for adults as well. And in Romans chapter 7, verse 15, Paul writes this way. He talks about this conflict that goes on. And he says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Essentially saying that there are things that I know that I should not be doing, that I tell myself, Stephen, don't do this. Yet I find myself doing them. And Paul is probably one of the realest texts in the Bible because it speaks to what the faith experience actually is. Paul speaks about this internal conflict that exists inside of us. And some people might word it this way, between the spirit and the flesh. You might have heard this language before. This may be older Christian language. The spirit versus the flesh, that they are at war with each other. Galatians 5, Paul talks about where he says, I walk by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh, right? He then goes on to list out things in Galatians chapter 5 that are associated with the flesh. And then later in verse 22 of Galatians chapter 5, he lays out what we know as the fruit of the Spirit. But it's interesting though, last week I mentioned that all of us are children. And I know if you're a parent that is trying to correct and rear your child, you might not want to hear that you're a child too. But according to God, all of us are children of God. And as I begin, I want to mention this, that every child of God is learning how to live in the tension of right and wrong. That each one of us are trying to live in the tension of trying to do the right thing and the wrong thing, the good thing and the evil thing, the challenging thing and the thing we don't really want to do, right? Whether that is a 5-year-old who keeps having a meltdown over being told no, or the college student struggling with decision making, or the parent and the older person dealing with anger and bitterness. We are all trying to live in the tension of doing the right thing and the wrong thing, or the spirit and the flesh, or right versus wrong. But misbehavior and missteps, I believe, are an opportunity for us to see that we are all children caught in the same struggle. That what your child is dealing with or what someone in your family is dealing with, it's not unique to them, because all of us are trying to figure out what it means to live out our lives in this struggle between good and evil, doing the right thing and the wrong thing. And I want to highlight something as we think about raising children, we think about guiding families. For many of us, when we think about these things, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain things or images or moments in our lives that we turn to. Each of us have had experiences where we were disciplined in some way. And childhood discipline, we're gonna get psychological for a second. Child discipline directly shapes our adult and emotional regulation, our relationship patterns, our self-esteem. See, what happens to us in childhood impacts us later. And the American Psychological Association says that sometimes, depending on how you were raised, whether it was fear, pain, emotional hostility, it can alter how a child views security and authority, right? It can alter their brain development. It can make them more prone to mental health challenges. It shows that some people were 1.5 times higher risk of developing certain mental health things based on how they were parented. And oftentimes they go undiagnosed because it's also found in families that sometimes may not acknowledge the reality of these things. Right? Self-esteem can be difficult. Aggression and conflict issues. The things that we watch, oftentimes we can emulate unless we work to eliminate them from our lives. But it also describes this, where if someone that grows up in a positive environment growing up can have really strong emotional regulation, intrinsic motivation, problem solving. They can view relationships as secure, knowing like, oh, I can trust this person, or I grew up with people that I knew believed in me. And there's this image of a brain scan here, if you look. And the first one, it shows strong activity in vivid hues, red, orange, yellow, and green, which point to normal, healthy brain development and function, as well as active temporal lobes. But on the other hand, the development of a child's brain during abuse, trauma, and neglect exhibits decreased activity in the darker hues, as you see, green, blue, and black, which suggests inferior brain development and function. The temporal lobes are particularly undeveloped and less active. I show this as a way for us to understand that all of us are navigating the effects of sin in our lives. All of us have a different starting point. All of us have ways in which our brain from the time we were young was impacted. And now we are trying to lead and guide organizations, lead and guide families, lead and guide children. And as we try to lead, we carry them, but as much as we try to bury them and try to hide them from people, we bury them alive, and they show up in bigger and stronger ways when we have a position to lead, when we have a position to guide. Many times we say things like, oh, I went through this, and I turned out fine. I went through something really look at me, I turned out fine. But I believe the gospel calls us to something greater than just fine. Something far beyond just, oh, I turned out fine. I believe God invites us to prioritize restoration over retribution. Restoration over retribution. I'm gonna look at this in two passages. So if you want to, I don't actually have all of them on the screen. All I have is, boom, that right there. So that means you're gonna have to grab your Bible or your phone. So we're gonna look at John chapter 4. John chapter 4. And it is a familiar story probably to you. Both stories we use will probably be fairly familiar. John chapter 4, we find the woman at the well, or some people refer to her as the Samaritan woman. And we see here that in verse 6, it begins with Jacob's well was there, right? Jesus has been traveling. Verse 6 begins with, and Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. Some versions may say it was about noon. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, give me a drink, for his disciples had gone away to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Verse 11, sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself? We'll skip down a little bit to where it says, Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I will give them will never thirst. Verse 15, the woman asks, sir, give me this water, so that I will never be thirsty and won't have to keep coming here to draw water. Verse 16, the tide turns. He says, he told her, go call your husband and come back. Verse 17, I have no husband. She replied, Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. Verse 18, the fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. And what you have said is quite true. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you claim this place we must worship in is in Jerusalem. And it continues. Verse 21, woman, Jesus replied, believe me, there is a time coming when you will worship neither on this mountain or Jerusalem. Verse 23, yet a time is coming that has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. Verse 25, the woman summarizes what Jesus is saying, I know that Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. Verse 26, Jesus says, I am the one who's speaking. I am him. And that whole sequence is kind of a wild interaction. Sorry I read the whole thing, but I kind of wanted us to get the full context as we look through it. Because as Jesus interacts with this woman, he first takes note of the fact that there is a woman who is drawing water. And in many ways, Jesus is already breaking cultural norms. And many of us operate in certain cultural norms when we think about discipline or we think about social interactions. And Jesus just immediately begins to break them. He speaks across cultural lines. He tells her about this living water. But in the process, her personal life comes up. And needless to say, her personal life has been a little bit of a mess over the previous years, right? She has been with 5 different men, and she is currently living with somebody else. But it's interesting the way Jesus addresses the misbehavior, the missteps, the mistakes that she's made, because it's very clear, it's very obvious, right? Jesus very easily could have resorted to name-calling her, which she has heard before. She's probably been told, man, she can never keep a man. She must have some sort of problem, right? But Jesus in that moment sees that situation. He possesses very valuable information about this woman. And a lot of us are in positions where we possess very valuable information about people, about our children, about those that we love. And what Jesus does is he opens her to the natural consequence of her choices, right? He begins to show her and say, hey, you've been with 5 people, you're with someone now, they're not even here filling the water with you. You're here by yourself. And he points out to her that maybe there's an opportunity for something that is greater than this moment you're experiencing, something greater than the reality you are living in. And the text says this, and we might gloss over it. I don't know if I have a slide for it. Actually, oh, no, there it is, perfect. Where we gloss over it really quickly in chapter 6 of chapter 4. It says, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon or 6th hour. And what's interesting about that is when people would go to draw water, how many of you guys know the science fact about noon, right? Is noon the best time to go stand outside in the heat? No, right? Typically, right, noon is the time where the sun's rays are the highest. They have the shortest distance to travel to the earth. So the sun feels the harshest at noon. So the fact that she is there at noon means that, is it a crowded time at the well? More than likely, she is there probably by herself or with the other people who are outcasted. And she goes there alone at noon, and Jesus goes there and meets this woman in the heat of the day. Jesus recognizes that by her being there at noon, that she was willing to stand there in the desert so that she could be alone, because she didn't want to interact with anyone. She didn't want to be seen. He recognizes that this woman is already dealing with shame, already dealing with the reputation. She already felt small and socially anxious. And so often in our relationships with people, we have the opportunity, we possess vulnerable information about somebody. We see something. And it's all in how we respond, right? Because what Jesus does is Jesus actually exposes her. He actually says the thing that she probably does not want to be known. But he sees it, and he doesn't ignore her sin, neither does he weaponize it. He possesses it and says, hey, maybe there is something better for you than this situation. He acknowledges what she's dealing with. He acknowledges the missteps, the misbehaviors. Jesus addresses it while offering her living water, saying, you are thirsty, but there is something that can satisfy you. The thirst that you feel, the desire that you have goes far beyond water. And I want to invite you towards it. But imagine how different the situation would have been if Jesus had told her, man, you just are, man, imagine what he could have called her. I don't even want to say it in church. Imagine if he had said it. Imagine what he had repeated what people had said to her. Right? But in that moment, when Jesus gives the vulnerable information, I could imagine that for many of you, when someone says something that you don't want other people to know, a little chill goes up your spine. You get a little worried. You're like, okay, like, what are they going to do with this? And if you grew up in cultures or in moments or in situations where people then use that against you, you can be very defensive. But in this moment, Jesus exposes her and then points her to something greater. He uses it as a teaching lesson, not as a weapon against her. And when we think about how we relate to those that we love and those that we are close to, I invite us to not do that either. Because I want to ask, how do we handle people when they mess up? Do we expose them to punish them, or do we tell them the truth to see their need for healing? Because so often, a misbehavior is a window of opportunity to see deeper into a person and invite them to a different reality. So often, that information is a gift. It's an opportunity for us to carry them to a new place. Because of what Jesus has done for us. We don't have to beat them down. Rather, we can see it as a privilege that we are close enough to someone that we can share life with them, that we can grow with them. Because vulnerability in the community of God is a gift. Brené Brown says, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. Vulnerability is the birthplace of that. But in order to be vulnerable, it's scary. Someone will have some power in that situation. And as leaders of families, of communities, and of spaces, I invite us to take that and recognize the power and the beauty of that. Because our behavior is not our identity. Our mistakes are not our destiny, and our flaws are not the final story. It is just the beginning of restoration in Jesus and our families. The next thing is this. If you want to go to John chapter 8, the next big point I want to make in, I guess, my research project or my case study is that shame is a terrible motivator for getting the result you want. Shame is a terrible motivator for getting the result that you want. A well-documented text is in John chapter 8, where Jesus encounters a woman now caught in adultery. And it's interesting, though, that John highlights situations with women because women were often not spoken of deeply in certain texts by the writers, right? But Jesus goes into in-depth stories showing Jesus' interaction with women. And the text begins here by saying, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning, and he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Verse 3, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and placed her in the midst of him. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, we are commanded to stone such a woman. So what do you say?" This they said to him to test him, but they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who was without sin among you be the first to cast the stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman. And Jesus stood up to her and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Verse 11, "No one, Lord." And Jesus says, "Neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more." In this situation, right, Jesus encounters a woman, and the woman is brought to Jesus while people are trying to take away her dignity in this moment, right? They are trying to really bring her down. But Jesus, before they even get the chance to get too puffed up in attacking someone else, Jesus says, "Hey, just remember that all of you are sinners too. Just remember, while you are so excited about condemning somebody else, just remember your placement too. Just remember the things that you do when nobody's watching." See, Jesus took note of a few things. The first thing, it says that she was caught in the very act of adultery. To not go into detail, it's interesting, though, that she was caught in the act, which meant that people were watching her, waiting for her to fail. People were waiting, counting down, hoping that this woman would fail so that they could bring her and condemn her, because they had a preconceived idea about who she was. And the second thing is, lucky for her and lucky for us, that Jesus knows the full extent of the law. Because in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, the text actually says this: "The man that commits adultery with another man's wife, even he that commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death." That's what the text says. How many people do they bring to Jesus? They bring one. According to the scriptures, according to the law, you were supposed to bring both of them. And Jesus recognizes the discrepancy there. He recognizes the fact that they are trying to humiliate this woman. They are trying to take away her dignity. And some scholars say that it was possible that the people there didn't even see her as a person. They just saw her as disposable. One quote says, "They cared nothing for the true righteousness of the situation. All they cared about was making sure that they could formulate a charge. She was just an instrument to bring a charge to Jesus." See, in misbehavior, family, we cannot allow the act to overtake the person. We cannot allow the mistake that they've made to remove the person of who they are. People cannot be erased that easily in the community of God. See, here's the difference between how humanity thinks and how it's different than Jesus. See, while people saw what the woman did and they saw it as worthy of the judgment of God, what Jesus saw was very different. What Jesus saw was he saw a woman with failed relationships. He saw a woman with dreams that have died. He saw a woman who had sleepless nights, worried about herself. He saw a woman that had been ignored time after time for job opportunities, had failed out on all these different opportunities, and her struggles with faith, her struggles with self-esteem, the time she didn't really believe in God, the trauma, the guilt, the shame. Jesus saw those things, and in that moment, he responds out of that. Because Jesus knew that according to the law, all of us fall short. And no amount of shame, no amount of shaming this woman was going to change that situation. So what Jesus does and what he does to us in our sin is Jesus protects us. And he protected this woman. Jesus doesn't let her off easily, though. Right? He does go and tell her, "Go and sin no more." And I believe that it is a master class. Did my mic go off? You guys hear me? Oh, we're good. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure. All right. Missed the echo. But Jesus offers what I believe is a master class in restorative discipline. right? He offers a lesson for us in what it looks like because he says to her, see if I have the equation here. Boom. All right, Jesus' formula. He removes condemnation, right? He says, there is no one here that condemns you. Punishment and shame, he eliminates it. But he does not remove expectations. Go and sin no more. While saying, hey, you are not condemned, you are not seen as just your bad act, but know that I'm calling you somewhere better. And it's okay to build some guidelines, right? You might be wondering, like, how do I do this? Right? It's okay to build some guidelines. Just don't build them on shame. When we lead out of shame, it is a terrible motivator because what shame does is shame drives us to hide deeper, to be more secretive. Shame says you are bad and you deserve to suffer. Restorative guidance says you are valuable, your behavior missed the mark. We are here to help you do better the next time. In John chapter 8, Jesus sees beyond this woman's mistakes and shows her that no matter what the world may say about her, shame will not be found in my presence. In the eyes of Jesus, you can find a grace that will never shame you. You might feel disappointed or frustrated or upset. The text also describes this. Jesus stoops down. I find it really interesting that in this situation, Jesus stoops down, that John includes that. John is very concise in the way he writes, yet for some reason he includes this little detail. See, stooping down meant humility and lowering yourself, especially in a lot of cultures, right? It's a way you show respect to people. But typically, it would be the person who is lower than you in society would be the person to lower themselves. And the person who was of higher esteem would allow them to lower themselves and touch their feet or make some acknowledgement of the fact that they are below them. The text says that Jesus lowers himself. And there are a few different times where Jesus does this. He does this in another miracle. But when Jesus comes down, family, when Jesus stoops down, I believe that is when things begin to change. Because Jesus wanted to show this woman that he cared. He wanted to show her that there was more to her life than the label that had been placed on her. So what Jesus does is he doesn't speak from a place of high up. Jesus comes down to her level and communicates with her and says, hey, go and sin no more. Hey, go walk in something new. Go walk in something more beautiful. See, Jesus lowering himself is what he is doing even in that moment by being on earth. Right? The text says that Jesus left heaven and lowered himself into earth. He lowered himself into a manger. He lowered himself after creation, right? He lowers himself in the sanctuary. Jesus comes down so that we can go up. He calls us to a place that is greater than we could have ever been. Jesus lowering himself is the image that I want you to carry with you, that Jesus comes close to us in our moments of misbehavior. In your child's misbehavior, I want you to imagine Jesus being close to them, coming down to their level and saying, what can we do to restore you? What can we do to grow you into something different, into something new? See, we have the gift to remind our children and our families of that Jesus, that we can correct without shame, that we can lead without guilt, and that we can guide with hope. The door is always open. I want to end with this story. Probably familiar, maybe just in a different way. There was a family story of a young man who had a massive falling out with his father, which is quite common sometimes. They have a huge conflict. There was discussions of money and shame and poor choices. They said a lot of things that they shouldn't have said, threats to leave, and then one day the son packs his bags, walks out of the door, and completely cuts ties with his parents, takes the portion of his retirement money, and leaves. And months turn into years. The parents don't get so much as a photo. They're trying to follow him on Instagram, try to see if they can find something on Facebook or TikTok or something, trying to see if there's something where they can see what their son is up to. They Google him, hoping they can find something. They have no idea where he is. And the weight of his mistakes, though, grew heavier and heavier. He began to realize that, man, this whole thing didn't work out the way I had planned on it. And he assumed that the bridge that had been there between him and his parents had been burned for good. He figured that if he ever showed his face back to his parents' house, that, man, they had something waiting for him. He figured that if he ever went there, the door would be slammed in his face. Or at least he would get the lecture of a lifetime. Sometimes those are worse than getting the door slammed in your face or getting spanked. But shame told him that he was permanently disqualified. One night, he found himself at rock bottom. He was in the area. Obviously, his parents didn't know he's in the area, and He drives past his childhood home just to look at it from a distance, maybe walk down memory lane, so to speak, have a little bit of nostalgia. And as he pulled down the familiar street, his heart began to pound as he got closer, and he noticed something strange at his parents' house. The front porch light was on. In fact, every single light in the house was on. And that was funny to him because growing up, his dad had always told him to not waste the electricity. He'd gotten in trouble for touching the thermostat or leaving a light on. But on this particular night, every single light in the house was on. And he knew his dad hated to waste. So confused, he gets out of his car, he parks his car down the street and walks around the neighborhood, just kind of circles the neighborhood a little bit, goes up the driveway. And when he reaches the front door, he sees that the door's a little cracked. And he also remembers that his dad was really big on the security system. Like, hey, we got to make sure the doors are locked. We got to make sure, like, no one can come in. Yet, for some reason, the door was left cracked with all the lights on. And so he's like, well, kind of turns the knob and pushes the door open a little bit. And he steps inside. Before he could even say a word, his father comes rushing down the stairs and wraps his arms around him and doesn't even ask about his mistakes, doesn't ask about where you've been the last few years. All he says to him with tears in his eyes is, "You're home. We have been leaving the door open for you every single night." He said, "Sit down, have a meal. Let's make up for lost time." See, family, this is the heart of God. As leaders and as parents and just believers of God, we have the invitation to mirror that same grace to each other. That in moments when someone makes a mistake, when they might be pushed away in shame, we have the gift and the responsibility to always leave the door open, because we want to let them know that you can always come back home. Romans 8 verse 1 says, "There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." See, correction isn't just about telling people what they did wrong. It's an opportunity to show them what grace is. It's about building a culture and a home where those that are closest to us know this fundamental truth about God. No matter how far you wander, no matter how badly you mess up, you can always come back home. The door is open. I want to give a few things to summarize with, since this was a case study, so to speak. A couple of maybe steps or things to think about when you're thinking about discipline. First one is the pause before you punish. This one is interesting because I feel like it's easier said than done, but the practice really is, before reacting to something, take a moment to pause and check your own emotional state. Right? So many things are done wrong. Even if we are accurately responding to a situation that has happened, checking our own emotional state can make you avoid saying something that you shouldn't say. And ask yourself this question: am I about to use shame to control them, or am I responding to teach them? Because shame says you are bad, but maybe instead we should say you made a mistake and you are valuable enough to fix it. And when they lose control, you're there to provide them a safe place. Second one is separate behavior from identity to break the cycle of shame. Consciously change the vocabulary you use when addressing a mistake. Instead of labeling someone with "you are so lazy," "you're defiant," "you're irresponsible," address the actual choice. "That was a poor choice. I'm disappointed in the decision that you made," but it doesn't define who you are. See, never attack a person's identity to fix their behavior, because your mistakes are not your destiny. You are loved and capable, and we're going to figure out how to solve this together. Third one is shift from retribution to restoration. Do so by leaning on grace. When rules are broken, step away from harsh punishments designed to make a child suffer in isolation. Instead, lean into restorative action. What needs to be repaired? How can we get back to the place we want to be? Because retribution and shame only cause people to hide more. And the fourth one is this: keep your own porch light on. Create an environment where you are able to communicate certain things without the fear of rage or emotional degradation. Let them know that if you ever mess up, that my door is always open, my light will always be on. See, grace doesn't lower the standard, but it completely removes the condemnation. Keep your light on so that when shame tries to drag them down, they can know that they can always come back home. And family, we have a home with Jesus. And I invite you to know that as you lead, whether it's your family or in certain pockets of your life, that you would know that in the same way that God extends grace to you, let's extend that grace to each other. Because God calls us to our ultimate home, and we can always come back home no matter how far we fall. Let's pray. Dear God, as we leave this place, as we reflect on what it means to lead in moments of misbehavior or discipline or whatever that is, God, I am so grateful that you leave the light on. That you let us know that we can always come back to you. And God, I pray that as we are in the spaces where we lead, that we would know that you're our Father too. That you extend grace to us as well, God. And out of that grace, God, may we lead, may we guide, may we support. Thank you for the gift of this community. Thank you for the gift of this moment and the gift of the gospel. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.